in the Richard Day tapes, does any of that operation, does that fall under any, does any of the stuff in those tapes fall under any specific operation out of the 10 per se that you listed?
Oh, that I listed?
Yeah. Or is it just like spray? Is it just
let me get my list out here. I got it here. I don't know that anything would be a direct necessary parallel, except that the Rockefeller Foundation plays a key role in the planning and strategies of the day, discussions, and the origins of the CIA and the OSS do directly relate to the Rockefeller family and what they pretty much funded and helped to establish. David Rockefeller brags about that in his memoirs, for example. He himself, by the way, used to be an intelligence operative in the Army when he was younger. So I would say, if anything, elements of MKUltra, I think, played into the day tapes, because even though the day discussions were not about mind control operatives and that kind of stuff, the research that was derived from a lot of the MKUltra studies dealt with social engineering and social control. So that could be one element of it. Paperclip is possible too, because of course Paperclip is 1945 to 1959, and that involved importing a lot of the tiny mustache men higher ups and trying to derive a lot of their engineering scientific knowledge for the US and for the West. And so I would imagine a lot of the ideas about genetics, genetic modification, breeding science, Malthusianism, dysgenics, probably a lot of that came from some of the Paperclip people, and that would have overlap with the day tapes. And maybe just loosely some of the others, but I think for the most part, those would be the most relevant to the day tapes.
Well, you brought up 2 out of the 10. Paperclip that's been in the news recently with all the Argentina stuff, that there might be a declassification of some of Tiny Mustache Man's vacation plans, and then also MKUltra as well. We heard about remote viewing of the Ark of the Covenant, the CIA faking alien abductions that's been published about again recently. And then I saw you put out this top 10. I said, bingo. So let's tie it all together. Paperclip, MKUltra. What are the other 8? I'd love to get through some of those.
Yeah, I didn't put these in any definite order. They're just kind of the top 10 that I picked out of 20 that are declassified. So all 20 are pretty wild. And then I tried to kind of just randomly pick the ones that I thought were the top 10, but in no specific order. So of course we have MKUltra, which is probably the most famous, up there with perhaps Paperclip. And this is the dozens of universities, dozens of academic institutions that were intent upon basically studying the human psyche and mastering it, and then sort of exporting that ideology into mass formation, psychosis, psychological engineering. And we can find parallels, for example, with World War II era psychological warfare theorists like Jussi Merleau. We did a lecture through his entire book. He was a World War II psychological warfare expert for the Allies, and he wrote on that topic. There's also Operation Mockingbird from the 40s to the 70s. And this is, of course, the CIA buying off journalists throughout the Cold War to make sure that the journalists, there's about 400 or 500 throughout the world, would repeat the CIA line. That doesn't mean that I think that Soviets were the good guys or that I'm pro-communist, but throughout that period, you do have the subversion of journalism from the 40s all the way to the 70s. And it was a pretty widespread program. And I would say that even though this program, Mockingbird, ended in the 1970s, we have the same analog to that with like Mockingbird 2.0, with all of the big players and big entities shutting down social media, censoring and banning social media, that kind of stuff.
What about Hollywood in itself? Because of course, news media, being in every newsroom in the country, and that's one thing. But when was it? Was it we hear about Independence Day or Close Encounters of the Third Kind or anything else like that, where this is an era where when you start talking about and putting movies out there about sensitive subjects, about whether it be extraterrestrial life or high technology or anything like that, there's usually some sort of a government attaché that's there to give you all of the ins and outs, to make it more believable, but to also not to give people too much. We heard about that. When did that become, from your research, a little bit more, I don't know, I would say normal?
Well, one of the projects that would relate to that would be Project Stargate, because even though Stargate is not explicitly about aliens, the idea was that from 1978 to 1995, they would be studying the occult. So it wasn't just remote viewing. They were studying all kinds of different techniques. If you watch the movie Ministeric Goats, that's kind of based on this type of project where the Army, the Stanford Research Institute, First Earth Battalion, they were looking into all these different mentalism and psychic abilities and telekinesis and remote viewing and astral projection, and possibly also things relating to LSD, hallucinogens. And if you combine that with gateway process, which was also declassified not too long ago, I think it's from the early 80s, this talks about transcendental meditation. It talks about biofeedback, biohacking, meditation, and so forth to achieve, these esoteric enlightened states. And could this be weaponized, and could we create psi-spies? And the Soviets even had their own psi-spy program. So there was kind of a mirror project going on in the Cold War with the Soviets doing their psi-spies and the West, the CIA doing their psi-spies. And I think that a lot of that maybe even inadvertently does tie into like the UFO phenomenon, because a lot of the people who would be doing these meditation sessions and these these LSD type studies and research, or DMT, the float tanks, with John C. Lilly, they would think they were contacting beings and entities. So a lot of times they thought, oh, this is the aliens, right? So they would just kind of make a one-to-one assumption that the beings that they're contacting must be the same as the beings that are happening throughout the Foo Fighter UFO phenomena. So I wouldn't be surprised if I think there is overlap. And I think that the whole UFO phenomenon pretty much comes out of all this MKUltra research. They want to give everybody a new ideology in the West and in the world, a new religion.
I guess we could just jump right there real quick. Then perhaps we can go back to, and it doesn't have to be the 10 that you picked. It could be any of the crazy 20. Because I'd love to hear a little bit more of this. It's a review, but there's also some stuff I had forgotten about or never heard about at all. But when it comes to intelligence services and the space programs, a lot of esoteric background there, no doubt. Paperclip had been brought up again, like I said, with the Argentina news. And of course, Paperclip was the lifeblood of the space race. But when it comes to NASA-based PSYOP theories, they are aplenty. And I just wonder, because, I never talked about this, but just the nature of this to begin with, like the nature of space in general. I don't know what your take on the whole thing is. Have we even been to space, do you believe?
I would definitely think that there are satellites, and probably there is the ability to go into low Earth orbit. I'm pretty much a skeptic about a lot of other stuff. I think NASA was in some way a kind of a front, a cover for Cold War stuff. But and probably they were erecting a lot of the global spying infrastructure, is my view as to what they were doing in the Cold War under the cover of NASA and space. I think they were setting up like the Star Wars Defense Initiative and that kind of stuff. But beyond that, I don't really. I think a lot of the space stuff was just Cold War propaganda. I don't have any set opinions on the structure of the universe or how it works or what's really going. I have no idea what's really going on out there. So I'm a agnostic skeptic on those kinds of questions, but I do think that there's a pretty deep rabbit hole that you can go down when it comes to NASA during the Cold War and how well it functioned as a kind of a propaganda tool. But as to how advanced the space tech really is, I have no idea.